Try this again. All right. Well, I'm out here with Melissa Keenan from the Sauk County Land Conservation Office. Actually, it's Planning and Zoning and Land Conservation, I believe now, right?
Conservation, Planning, and Zoning.
Okay. Hey, that's a good point. Something to think about when you're looking for the conservation, land conservation folks, which pretty much exists in most counties, certainly in southern Wisconsin. They're sometimes combined in different departments. So I believe Dane County includes parks and conservation. Some of the other counties have standalone, some don't. So you do have to kind of dig a little bit to make sure you're finding the department. But Melissa is going to talk a little bit about some of the programs that are available through Sauk County and really all the counties, I suppose, around the state and the conservation practices.
Yeah, so what we do is we provide technical assistance to producers in our county. If they have questions about different practices that they can do on their farm for conservation, we can provide technical assistance to them. And we do that regardless if they want to receive cost share or not. We do have cost share available through our department. It's a small pot of money, but they can get cost share for barnyard improvements, grass waterways, nutrient management planning, pasture management, so installing fences or water, or establishing new pastures. So there's quite a few practices that they can get cost share on. We do tend to team up with our USDA NRCS office because they end up having a lot more money available. So that's a partnership that we have that we work with them on. So we work with a producer, find out if they are interested in cost share, and then we figure out which program works best for them. You know, some we can provide better cost share for certain practices, and the USDA office can provide better cost share for other practices. So that's, you know, something that we work with the producers on.
Excellent. So one of the things that in my class, there's actually a couple of students that have actually pretty small acreage, and you work with, size doesn't matter for the programs that you're working with, right? Is that correct?
Right, yeah, we work with small farms all the way up to huge farms, you know, a couple hundred acres, thousands of acres. You know, and whatever we can help them with, we do. We have somewhat of an urban presence as well. You know, we've done rain gardens and things like that with different, you know, people who live in the city, working with recycling programs, rain barrels, compost bins, you know, things like that. We're always interested in trying to figure out ways to conserve our natural resources on small scales all the way up to big scales.
Excellent. All right. Well, Melissa, we appreciate your time and sharing a little bit about what the conservation offices have to offer. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Well, Serge, you and I have got to work together for a number of years here. I think about 12 years, in fact, now. How long have you been with the Land Conservation Office in Sauk County?
I've been fortunate to be here for the last 21 years.
Yeah.
21 plus years at this point. And, you know, Melissa had just mentioned about the programs that land conservation offices throughout the state have to offer. She covered them pretty well. But a lot of our work also involves work with folks who are not taking cost sharing. And so some people are uncomfortable with getting cost sharing from the government. And so it's not a problem with us. Our goal is to implement conservation practices and improve our waterways and our soils and our land in general. So whether that's done through conservation programs or not, it really makes no difference to us. I have worked with countless producers over the years that they don't want cost sharing, but we provided the technical assistance. How do I fix this erosion problem? Do you have some ideas on how I can do that? I'm thinking about turning to rotational grazing. How many animals can I fit on this land, and how do I lay this out? And that's the stuff we do all the time. And also, can I make any money doing this? So recently we've started to work with producers on financials, you know.
Right.
Just simple budgeting, whether it's the crop budget or pasture budget, you know, how does that make financial sense for me to go this route? And so in some ways it's simpler without the cost sharing, but the cost sharing is there because, say you are setting up a pasture system, there's a lot of fencing that's involved with that.
Sure.
And there's watering systems, and you have to seed it down to a pasture mix of some kind. And so, you know, having 70, 80, 90% cost sharing helps with that. it just helps you get over the hump.
Get
And
it
so
up and started.
I want to make sure that that is there and available for people, but you don't necessarily need to do that. You don't need to. And one of the things that we do often is, recently more so, is trying to instill the principles of soil health. There's no cost sharing necessary for that. You can do that on your own. Again, there is cost sharing for cover crops, but these principles are applicable anywhere in the state, anywhere in the USA for that matter. And the principles are, have a living cover in your soil 24/7, 12 months out of the year. You want something living in that soil at all times. The other thing is try and add some diversity to the landscape if you can. So instead of just corn or corn and beans, let's add winter wheat into it, which then allows us to put in multi-species cover crop, which is what we have here in this field. This one happens to be a three-way mix of peas, oats, and radishes. And so that right there that's the second principle, is just having some diversity. And always cover the soil. Nature, hardly ever do you see in nature where the soil is bare. It's always covered with plants for the most part. And so when the residues are removed from the soil, we have bare soil conditions. That leads to excessive erosion. That also tends to kill microbial life at the surface of that soil. It bakes the soil. We're losing nutrients into our waterways, and so that's a principle that we would like to come through also. And so,
and then the last one being the tillage issue, which are kind of related to that.
Right.
Yeah.
So once we, obviously, the two are together. Once we till, now we've lost the cover, and so we try to minimize tillage as much as we can.
Well, it's interesting how you talked about this being adding into a winter wheat and having that as part of a corn and soybean. So if you go from just the two crops in a corn soybean rotation, adding wheat as that third species, putting out here a three, in this case a three.
That's four.
Now you're up there in your
you got 4, 5, or 6 species diversity,
right.
And then the different microbes in the soil need different roots,
right,
to function. And what's the beauty of it too is, because we have legumes out here, that next year's crop will be corn, and now they can utilize the nitrogen in the soil, and so you can cut back on your nutrient after a while.
Right.
And in this field 3 years ago, we went through and we did some soil tests out here, where we took a 6-inch ring, we pounded it into the soil, added the equivalent of an inch of rain, and started the top stopwatch to see how long did it take to infiltrate. Over an hour, and the water did not move. It did not go into the soil. And so we started implementing no tillage, crop rotations, cover crops, and in a matter of 2 years, we did the test again last fall, and the water infiltrated in 6 minutes.
Well,
in a matter of 2 years.
Right.
That's a huge difference. And so, why does that matter? Well, that's water available for the crop. Mm-hmm. That's also water that's not running off into our waterways, causing other problems there, from eutrophication, the greening up of our lakes and rivers and streams. It's also a resource that, if we can retain on the land, it provides nutrients for the following crop. And so there's a lot of reasons for improving infiltration. It's often been said that we have a runoff problem, but really we have an infiltration problem.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Too much of our land is not infiltrating land in water. If you look at our typical runoff curve numbers, it's just basically it's the percent of the water that falls on the surface of the ground that actually runs off versus infiltrating. On most of our farms, the typical number is 70 to 80% of our water that falls on the landscape runs off.
Yeah,
it's not available then for that crop.
Right.
And a lot of our crops, our corn crop especially, needs a lot of water. Yeah. Something like 27,000 gallons per acre, something like that is what that needs to be there for that crop. And so if it's running off, it's not available to that crop. That's oftentimes a limiting factor to the corn crop. And so it's also causing massive flooding in our streams. If 80% is running off, well, that's where a lot of our flash floods come from.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, if we can revert that, and that's our goal then with our soil health, improving our soil's health actually improves infiltration. So now what we would like for it, want it to flip around so that 70 to 90% infiltrates and only a little bit runs off. And that can be accomplished, and it has been accomplished, and we're pretty close to that here in a matter of 2 or 3 years. There's very little runoff coming off anymore, and so there's very little flash flooding that's occurring in our local streams here because of this one spot.
Well, that's pretty awesome.
If we can do that on multiple fronts, then we're much better off.
I agree with you 100%, my friend. And one of the things that I hope to see in my career, what's left of it, somewhere between 15 and 20 years, is that we actually start to, you mentioned the economics of farming. I'd like to see us incorporate soil health and the things that we do to improve our soils and our water somehow related back to the value of the land, at least as we're going that way. We're out here, this is the Sauk County Farm, and we're out here in the Driftless region, so we've talked a little bit about that. A lot of the streams, which there's one down in there in this area, are all trout streams, and you mentioned all the water that comes off and runs off. Well, one of the problems for trout streams in particular is that they're cold water, need cold water for the trout to survive, and having that runoff event comes in, it brings warm water into it, it brings erosion into it and sediment, and really damages the trout streams pretty intensely real quick. You mentioned eutrophication. I just talked a little bit about that in one of my management videos that are out for our students to take a look at too. But this is a great opportunity to see this. We're going to get to play with this farm a little bit as far as the soils and stuff in our class, so we appreciate your partnership with that, and appreciate your time talking about soil health and the things you're doing in Sauk County, Serge.
You're welcome.